So welcome to Relentless Courage, and thanks for your patience. Today I have a very special guest. I have Jack Eason. He's written a new book called The Loneliness Solution, and I think there could not be a better time. It's so appropriate. And I know firsthand, Jack, that you did not start this book right when COVID hit. I mean, it takes a long time to write a book and publish it. So how appropriate, if you believe in coincidence, which I don't, but how interesting that it came out at this time. So I'm really interested to talk to you about this. And so Jack Eason has been the executive director of Crossover Cup's mission for 30 years. He also consults with a variety of nonprofit ministries, helping them develop successful approaches to fundraising and development. And he and his wife, Lynette, have been married for 23 years and have 2 children, and they live in Southern California. So I'm so excited to have you. Thank you so much, Jack.
Hey, thanks for having me today. Glad to get connected with you.
Thank you for the patience with our little tech issues. So you have this heart for what's going on with this generation, and I've heard you say this now, that you have this heart for what's going on with our generation, with loneliness. And there's a new study. I know there's a big study that came out of London saying it's the loneliest generation ever. So tell me, what inspired you to write this book? What are you thinking about this generation? Why do you have a heart for this?
Yeah, thanks. You know, and you're right, by the way, I did not write this knowing that there was going to be a pandemic. I actually turned in the manuscript in December of last year. And several people have said, man, you're really smart. I'm like, no, I had no idea. I had no idea. But my heart really was to see, especially Gen Z and millennials, but every age group, all of us, connected in community, because I think we are better together. I do think we're stronger together. And so when I pitched this idea to the publisher, they said, hey, we like that, but we've got a question for you. And I said, okay, what's that? And they said, are we even together? Are we even together? And if we're not together, what's preventing us from being together? And when I started doing research, Tana, I was like, wow, okay, I'm discovering that we are, it looks like we're together. We are connected. Of course, technology and social media, it looks like we're connected. But we're really not. We're lonely people. I mean, I even go to coffee shops and I'll see a crowd of people sitting together. They're not talking to each other. They're in their own worlds. So I think if we learn how to connect, maybe afresh and anew, we'll find a new sense of community that can really make us stronger and better and grow as a person.
I think that's amazing. Just throwing a side note, coincidentally, I have a new book coming out this January called The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. It's a memoir, but it's about overcoming anxiety, trauma, and grief and depression. And like you, I did not write it thinking that there was going to be a pandemic and all these people going through anxiety, trauma, grief, and depression. So I think, you know, like I said, if you believe in coincidence, that's one thing. I don't. I think it's sort of divine intervention. So I thought it was really interesting how that happened. And I applaud you for that. So I think right now, I think you're right. This generation is suffering. I know in our house, we've got 3 teenagers and pandemonium. I mean, it was it was crazy. And it's a challenge, especially during a pandemic. You know, we already have a challenge trying to tell teenagers to stay off their phones, to stay off their devices, to not play so many video games, to start socializing. Because it's a problem seeing teenagers socialize. Like they're starting to have issues with that. But now you have a pandemic, and what are you going to tell them? Like it's challenging, right? So what do you say to that?
Well, you're right. It is. I have my daughter's 21. My son is 19. He went to college his freshman year last year, and of course was interrupted with the COVID virus. Got home, and the fall rolled around, and they said, "Oh, we've got things figured out. Come back to campus. Come back to school." He was there 2 weeks. Now he's back home again. So it's interesting. That age group, perhaps like no other age group or generation in history, is facing some pretty crazy things with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And you know what we discovered in our house was some simple things like for the first time, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but for the first time in a long, long time, largely in part due to COVID, we actually ate a meal together around the table. Yeah. And the first couple of times that happened, where we found ourselves sitting around the dinner table because no restaurants were open because of the shutdown, it took a little while relearning how to communicate, because like you said, we brought our cell phones to the table, and finally my wife says, okay, cell phones, put them away. And we actually had to learn to have communication again. And I think, you know, I love technology. We're connected because of technology right now. I love it. But I think in some respects, technology has taught, this is a generation who has not grown up without the internet. They've
Right.
not grown up without technology, without eye gadgets. And so we haven't done a real good job. I haven't done a great job, maybe as a parent, at teaching my kids about old school communication and connectivity. So we've got to start there. And I think, too, even with social media, I was telling my son this the other day. I said, you can, in a sense, your generation has redefined incorrectly, I would say, friendship,
Yeah.
because you can add or subtract friends at will with a mouse click.
Isn't that
you know,
interesting? That's a really interesting point.
yeah.
And, so-
And for the rest of
when they
us,
do that, don't you think what we've seen at our clinics, at Amen clinics, psychiatric clinics, which are busier than ever right now because of what's going on, but we've
mm,
seen that actually affects kids' self-esteem when based on how many likes they get, how many followers they have, whether someone makes a negative comment or something on one of their posts, or like you said, unclicks, like unlike, then that actually has a very big impact. It's so interesting to see that someone you don't even know can affect your self-esteem.
that's right. It is a different world for them. And, we've got to teach them a new way to reconnect. Because the faults, I like to call them the fault shrines of Twitter and Instagram,
Hmm.
look like we have a lot of people. And I was telling my son, I said, I'll be honest. I said, Will, I said, I've got, whatever it is, 3,000 plus Facebook friends. But how many of those could I actually call at 2 a.m. if I
Yeah.
really needed something? And I said, that's how you really define friendship. So I think we've got to really get back to redefining some of these words. And friendship is one of those, and connectivity is another one of those. If we're going to turn the generation that's out there, and it's not just, it is 18 to 24-year-olds, at least statistics say, and research says is the loneliest generation on the planet. But I see adults my age. I see the older folks who are the second most lonely people, those maybe who have been married and have lost a spouse of 40, 50
Yeah.
years, and now they find themselves alone. So loneliness doesn't discriminate. It knows no age boundaries. All of us have been affected in some way by being lonely.
I want to just acknowledge that we have amazing, there's a lot of engagement right now and some great comments. And so if you'd like to afterwards take a look at some of these comments, they're really great. So, and I'll go through some of those in a second, but yeah, someone is saying one good thing about the masks is it forces eye contact. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's hard because I like to read people's faces, but I agree. You have no choice but to look at their eyes. I mean, that is an interesting point. I think this generation has a harder time with that, which is another interesting point. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about, because we've sort of been demonizing technology and social media and just technology in general for the last couple of years because it has really driven this wedge between people. But I will say one thing, with something like a pandemic where people live alone and they're completely isolated, and I know I've got a mother who's in that danger zone, and Daniel's parents both had coronavirus and couldn't see anyone. There is something to be said. I mean, it can be used. It's a tool. It's not good or bad. It's just a tool. It's how you use it. Because all of a sudden we saw the flip side of, I think, technology and how positive it can be, being able, even though you're not in person, if you can see someone's face on Zoom, if you can FaceTime them, it just has that ability to make you feel a little bit less alone.
Yeah.
But I think you do need to be able to see them. And so what do you think about that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And thank goodness for technology. I don't think technology is the single distinctive that we could look at and say that's the problem. That's the problem for loneliness. No, it's a contributing factor, I'm sure. But I also think, as you're pointing out, it's a good thing. I know I've connected with my parents a lot through all this chaos with FaceTime, and they have said, though, it's interesting from a grandparent perspective. They've said, you know what, we're grateful that we've got this technology to connect, and it's awesome because we can see our grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing like seeing them in person and giving them a hug.
Right.
So community has somewhat been replaced, and this is before the virus. I saw somebody commenting about, was loneliness an issue before COVID and coronavirus? Yeah, absolutely. Loneliness was an epidemic long before COVID-19 came on the scenes.
That article from that, I think it came out in London, that said it was the loneliest generation. That was before the virus.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is an issue that's been around for a long, long time, not because of COVID-19, but I do think technology is a part of it. I think another part of it, and we're seeing this in our world right now, which really troubles me and really burdens me for my kids and your kids and other teenagers and the next generation. You look at some of the divisiveness that's happening in our world and
Yeah.
all the chaos and lack of communication. I think perhaps the reason that has contributed to loneliness in our attempt to give people validity. We have created all these subgroups, subcultures,
Mhm.
compartmentalized everybody, given them a name so that they can be distinct. And what we've actually done is we have separated everyone.
Oh,
We
interesting.
have pointed out all of our differences instead of our similarities. And so
Oh,
now
that's
a
fascinating.
lot of us are lonely because we feel like, well, who can I connect with? Because all these people are not like me. Well, they are like you. They have the same heart, the same emotions, the same brain, the same. We're all created the same way. So as I've talked to teenagers, especially, that's kind of been something that continues to come up time and time again.
So we just have a couple of comments here. We have someone saying we need to be comfortable being alone and not feel lonely. That's an important point.
Mm,
That's sort of the next level of being able to do that and be alone and not be lonely. That's when you're really, I mean, in my mind, that's when you're connected to another source. You're able to, meditate and pray and not feel lonely. I'm an
yeah,
introvert. I tend
yeah.
to like to be alone sometimes, but not all the time. But that's, what do you say to that?
That's a great point. I mean, Sandra, you're making a great point, and they are different. Being alone and being lonely are different. Most people would say I'm an extrovert, and I am, though sometimes I feel like an introvert because I get overloaded with people, and I'm just like, leave me alone.
Exhausted. Yeah.
I want to be by myself. I want to be alone, and that's good. We need to retreat and be alone, and that's healthy. And it is a healthy thing. But loneliness is different. I mean, you can be alone and be lonely. You can be in a crowd of people and be
Yeah.
lonely. It's this overwhelming feeling that you're not connecting. I had a teenager describe it to me last week, and she said, I feel like it's as if I'm in a box and I can't get out.
Yeah.
Somebody else described it. It's like I'm in the deep end of the swimming pool and I'm drowning. I can't get out. I feel lost, and disconnected. And so you can be in a room full of people and feel lonely. So Sandra's exactly right. Those are two totally separate things.
One thing that someone told me one time, and I thought this was super interesting, and it really crystallized this concept for me. If you took if you take a prisoner and you put them in solitary confinement, it's the worst punishment you can give them. They will literally lose their mind after a while, right? They lose
Yep.
concept of time and place, and they start to lose their mind. It's the fastest way to make a prisoner go crazy. If you took a monk and did the same thing, and you put him in a cell by himself and isolated him, to him, that's a gift. So that's really interesting, I think.
Mm.
It's really about what's going on in our heads. So, I mean, we are social beings. Human beings are created to be social. But at the same time, we can master our mindset, right? Um,
Yep.
we often say we treat people according to four circles: biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. They all matter. They're like four tires on a car. If one of them goes flat, the car will drive, but not as well, not very far. But if two of them go flat, you're going to crash. You're definitely going to crash. So if your spiritual circle and your social circle are out of balance with the rest of it, we all focus in the medical community on biology and even psychology, but social and spiritual are equally important. And where we work, we really focus on that. We know that that's hugely important.
I'm so glad you said that because I think you're exactly right. And I think the difference in those two personalities that you described, whether it's the guy in prison or the monk, is the spiritual connection. I mean,
Absolutely.
we are made that way. And I think, I mean, personal opinion, that the first connection we've got to have is with the spiritual.
Absolutely.
And after that, we still may be lonely. That's just the way it is sometimes. But then we can find some physical people, human beings, connectivity, community to keep us from being lonely. But there are people that I know who have, to your point, they have seemingly have a ton of friends, but because they're not connected to what I would call a higher power, God, I would say Jesus personally, they're still lonely. they're still lonely. So I think you're right. I think the spiritual is a huge component, and we tend to block that out. I've asked a lot of folks that I've been interviewing before writing this book about loneliness, why is it that, my mom and dad's generation and before them, they would often talk about spiritual things when it comes to connectivity, but not so much this generation, Gen Z, millennials. That's not their go-to. They don't even think about that for some reason. So I ask a lot of Gen Z, millennial age folks, why is that? Why does that not even show up on your radar? And it was interesting. Some of the answers, some of it was, we don't even go there because that was not even spoken of in our household, the spiritual aspect. So that tells me, okay, then the breakdown of the family could be contributing to this loneliness issue. Those that had been plugged into a faith community to find that kind of community that we're talking about, many of them said, been there, done that. So they tried it. So they didn't find the kind of community that they wanted, which my answer to that, one of my friends in particular, I said, have you ever been to a restaurant and gotten bad service or bad food? And he said, well, of course. I said, well, did you quit going out to eat? And he's like, well, no, obviously not. I said, well, friendship, building community and friendship's the same way. If you really, really want it and you're made for it, so to your point, you're made for it, you're going to desire it, then you're going to keep trying over and over again till you find the kind of community that you can blossom in and grow in. That's just the way we're wired.
Yeah, I love that. Dorothy Betters is saying, solitude is amazing when you have inner depth and great passion for life and learning. And I agree with that.
Yeah, wow, great word.
It's interesting. I want to be really respectful because we have, at our clinics, we see people from 117 countries and not everyone has the same belief system. So I want to be respectful, whether you are Jewish, Muslim, Christian, agnostic, whatever it is you are, I want to be respectful. But I do want to say this. Studies have shown that purposeful people live 11 years longer. So it's really interesting to figure out what that purpose is. We talk a lot about turning your pain into purpose, not focusing so much on yourself, but when you can turn that and help other people and connect to some sort of spiritual connection, it's really helpful. Now, for me personally, when I think of myself as, I have a lot of connection. And it's still, when quarantine hit and I was disconnected from my community at church, that really affected me. So I have a ton of connection. There's a ton of people in my house. I have no lack of people around me, but people are contagious too. So being connected, not just to your spiritual, but to something, for me, that helps me focus when I'm around a group of people that are focused on something bigger than themselves. I stop focusing on all of my, I hate to use the word selfish, but it is selfish. It's self-absorbed when you're just focused on what's going on with you.
Yes, no, you're exactly right.
And it's important to get back to at some point when we can. And that's what Zoom's been good for. Yeah,
I think you're exactly right. And when we get out of our own, my mom and dad used to call it a pity party.
Yes.
And when we get out of that and maybe put our eyes and our attention somewhere else. And that's why a lot of the things that I'm seeing as solutions to loneliness, spirituality obviously is a part of it. We've talked about that. The other thing is volunteerism. Go find somebody else who's not doing as well as you and help them out. Get plugged in. Habitat for Humanity or a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen, something in your community. It's interesting how when you do that, the loneliness goes away.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you've seen in your work, but one of the things that I seem to discover the more and more I do research is loneliness. It's not exclusively a North American, idea or issue, but it seems to be a mostly Western situation of people being lonely. Europe, America, Canada, because people in the third world countries, for example, countries in Africa, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, they're not lonely a lot. You know why? Because if they don't work together and find community, they die. They die of hunger. They die of starvation. So I think we could learn a lot from some of our third world friends at seeing how they connect in community and work together, and beyond their differences, they put their differences aside so that they can survive, really is what it amounts to. We have an interesting, this is Rosalind. She said, what if you're alone and handicapped? And that's hard. I'm a nurse. And we saw a lot of that people would be housebound, and that's tricky. And it's, and that's one of the things that the church has always been so good at, is having ministries where people go out and visit and really make this intentional, attempt to just stay connected with people like that.
And right now that's really difficult. So
Hmm.
what would you say in that case?
Yeah, Rosalind, that is difficult. I hope you're plugged into a community that cares about you and that can take care of you. And you're not alone. I don't know if that
Mhm.
helps encourage you that you're not alone in feeling that way. I think
And
about
thank you
you.
for being here.
Yeah, I think about Rosalind. I think about a friend of mine who was in the military, who experienced chemical warfare and came back and was in a situation. Now, he was a little different because he was already plugged into a community. Actually, in our home for about 3 years, a group that we met every week. We discovered because he was in community that he and his wife were about to lose their home because he couldn't keep a job because of this chemical warfare.
Mhm.
And I remember over a series of weeks, kind of behind the scenes, some of our families were taking up money and writing checks and putting them in this box an envelope to give to him. They came back the next week. We gave them this money. And I remember him just breaking down, Tana, crying, weeping, saying, "Why would you guys do this?" And somebody in our group, before I could come up with a profound answer, somebody in our group said, "Because that's what family does.
Mhm.
Family takes care of each other." And he wasn't talking about blood family.
Right.
He was talking about the community of family. So, Rosalind, my hope for you is that you can find that kind of family community because family takes care of each other. We really do. And whether you're handicapped or in the military or you have some other issue that prevents you from engaging and actually going somewhere, you're putting a spotlight on an issue that's really important. I'll be thinking about you.
I like that a lot. So to find community and connection, you write that we need to be willing to invest. What does that look like?
Well, we talked about it a little bit, just kind of surface level. We live in such a fast food mentality world. I left my house the other day. I took my dry cleaning, got breakfast, went to the bank, and said hey to a friend, and I never got out of my car
Yeah.
because everything was just so quick. We have modernized everything. And I think we think, and I think adults of every age think this, but especially our millennial and Gen Z friends, which, by the way, I'm not picking on that age group. I love that age group. I love that age group. I feel like I am a Gen Z person sometimes. And my kids say, "No, Dad, no, you're not."
You're right.
But I think we think sometimes because everything else works fast and quickly. Well, friendship should work that way. I mean, we shouldn't have to invest time, invest energy. And I was having this conversation with my wife the other week, and she said, let's talk about how many people we dated before we met each other and realized we
Bad
were
idea.
supposed to get married. And we didn't get into all the nitty gritty, but
Uh,
we talked about it and we realized, you know what? We've been married now almost 24, 25 years, but we neither one of us married the first person that we met. Now that happens for some high school sweethearts, but the point is you've got to be willing to invest, and
yeah.
it takes time. It takes time. Another friend of mine says you spell love Time. And if you really want to invest in the friendship and really be in a great community, to get that kind of friend, you have to be that kind of friend. And that's where it really gets hard, but that's the investment part that you're talking about.
And don't you think that requires a little bit of vulnerability?
Oh, absolutely.
And that's
Absolutely.
scary.
Vulnerability, accountability,
Yeah.
um, which are not great words that we like in our culture, right? Because it means being transparent with people, which that's a big word we like to hear in our culture right now. But yeah, it requires all those things, which is difficult.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. I mean, it's worth it. You and I know once you find that kind of community and you start seeing how there are benefits of community, by the way. And we're talking about some of those: doing life together, having family, people doing things for you, the spiritual part, praying for you. There's tons of benefits if you'll just push through to be on the receiving end of those.
We have a lot of spiritual people on here today. I'm reading some of these and I'm actually really surprised and impressed that there are so many people who have that mindset that
Mm,
being connected spiritually and serving others, I've been seeing that a lot, is a big key to not feeling lonely. And that makes me happy to see that. So, and someone, let's see, the Sandra again said, building a strong foundation for life takes time. Agree. So that's really great comments. So
yeah, that's
we'll,
awesome.
we'll try to answer more of these later, but most of them are not actually questions. They're how people are responding, I think, to the situation at hand, to what's going on in our society. And I think it's been fantastic. So So what would be your number one tip if you had to give someone a tip about if they're isolated and lonely right now, what would be your first tip that they can do today?
Well, I think, isolation can be good. I saw somebody comment about what about toxic people? You don't want to let those kind of people in your life. You're right. No, you have to use discernment and really think about who you're engaging with in community. And that's part of that process of investing is you find out, just like you do in dating or before you get married, you find out, I don't like that about that person. Or no, I really love that. So it takes some investing. I think the other thing that it takes, at least for me personally, Tana, is being observant.
Yeah.
I mean, so often I'm in my own world. I'm thinking about my own stuff, my own junk, and there's opportunities all around me if I would just open my eyes. And I would say that again to the church world. There's a lot of times we miss opportunities, like for Sandra, who was handicapped a moment ago. Churches miss those opportunities that we have. So we've got to open our eyes and see the opportunities that are around us every day. I'll just throw out one example. We had an elderly lady in our neighborhood. I didn't know who she was, but we had a storm come through, I guess 2 or 3 weeks ago. 2 huge trees fell down in her yard.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good use of social media through our neighborhood Facebook page. Somebody said, hey, this lady down the road, it's probably going to cost her several $1,000s to have a company come cut up those trees and get it cleaned up. Anybody want to grab a chainsaw and go down? And the next thing we knew, there's 20 guys who did not even know each other in this lady's front yard cutting up this tree. And we built community. At the end, people were like, hey, you want to go grab coffee? Let's get to know each other. So, spiritual things are good, but you don't have to be connected necessarily by that. I mean, some people are connected around sports, or if you have a love for music, or if you like to play chess or bridge. There are a lot of things that you can Google online and find a group in your neighborhood that's meeting about something. And I guarantee you there'll be something that you go, oh, I like to do that. And then be vulnerable and go get plugged into that group. And you might discover some friends you never knew you had.
Oh, I agree. And I like one thing you said about it's not just about connecting with anybody. You have to be careful of toxic people. And like I said, I wrote this book that's coming out in January, and it's about, growing up in a very chaotic environment when I was young with a lot of addiction, a lot of mental illness. And there are now, fast forward, I've got a lot of family members coming to me for help. And several of them, I have actually been able to help. There's a couple that I'm just going to be honest. We have to know when to draw boundaries because not for ourselves and our own sanity, but for the protection of our families, you need to know when to say no. And the way I think of it is some people you need to love from a distance, pray for them frequently, love them from a distance, do what you can, if it means sending something, if it means whatever it means, but there are times it's okay to say no. And my analogy for that is if you're an alcoholic, if you're a recovering alcoholic, you don't go hang out in a bar, not if you want to be sober. So if you're trying to have calm and peace and sanity in your life, and you know that there are people who just can't respect those boundaries, who just can't pull it together, they're just too far out there, find other ways to help them. I actually like that a lot. So I appreciate that. And let's see, this one says, I'm from New Zealand. My assistant is from New Zealand. I'm from New Zealand. Wow. Let's see, what does it say? I'm from New Zealand. I just started life in a new town. This is a timely message for me. I'm so glad to have you on here, Sandra. So I love this. So we can find your book where, Jack?
Well, it's available wherever good books are sold. Of course, Amazon. You can get it at my website if you like, Jack Eason, just my name, jackeason.org. I will tell you, if you go to the website and get it, there are a lot of other free resources because really the heart of this is just to get the message out on how you can build community. So there's videos and audio and outlines and things that you can use. But if you do get a copy, please pass it along to a friend when you're done, because the purpose of this, and again, you talked about the importance of purpose, is to impact people. So I hope you'll do that.
So jackeason.com, you can find Jack on Instagram at @WJackEason or Twitter or Facebook and pick up his book, The Loneliness Solution. I love that. If you are really struggling and you need professional help, my first suggestion would be pick up a book and try to get some really practical solutions in your life. But if you know that it's a little deeper than that, if it's depression, if it's social anxiety, and there's something going on in your life, we have doctors and therapists available at Amen Clinics. You can call 844-818-0616. We are living in unprecedented times. Our doctors will see you in person or on Zoom, whatever is easier for you. I love what you've done. So you can also get more information on TanaAmon.com, and please take a look at Jack's book. And next week, I have a special surprise. My husband's going to come on with me, and we are doing a cover reveal. It's been a long time, and Jack, you can appreciate this. When you write a book, it's like birthing a child.
Yes, it is.
It's like you're going through the pregnancy, and then you have the labor pains of birthing this book, and then you have to promote this book. And so I'm super excited. We are doing the cover reveal next week on the show. My husband will be joining me, so I hope to see you guys there. Thank you so much, Jack. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me, Tana. Thanks everyone for joining us in today.
It's been fantastic.
Bless you.